Okay, I want to welcome everybody to the San Antonio Storytellers Association, and like to give a shout out to everybody who's there. We have Bernadette, who's in Austin. Hey, Bernadette. We have John that's here, Donna Ingham that's here, Nathan is here, who's one of our devoted followers, who's always there at Brook Hollow. Want to thank John Hale for always setting this up for us, and just welcome to everyone. I hope that my sisters are here tonight as well. We are SASA, and we tell stories once a month on Zoom and on our YouTube channel, and you can check us out on Facebook. We're here from 7 to 8 o'clock. John Hale sets up Zoom for us, and we're going to have some.
Hi, we can't hear him. He's mute.
He's trying to set it up. See the man in the middle?
Unmuting it and it's jumping back. Is it good now? Okay. I really like that we're telling each month, particularly since we're all social distancing. This is a great way to connect, and it means so much to me. I hope it means as much to you, because I love being a part of this community and having people here from Austin and in their homes. I know last month we had people in Virginia. My sisters from Katy was here. So I love this connection. And so we got some great tellers for you tonight. Our first teller is Nancy Simpson. She's a member of San Antonio Storytellers Association. And I like that we're all here, because when we hear the stories, it's taking us away. The only place I get to go is HEB and the CVS store. But Nancy, she's here tonight, and she's just going to take us out in outer space, and we're just happy to be a part of it and orbit around and listen to what it is she has to tell us. So let's give happy hands for Nancy Simpson.
Thank you, Mark. Am I unmuted? Thank you, Mark. Can I be heard?
She's mute. Can't hear.
Now, is that better? No?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. All right. So here we go. This is a story about Enos. Enos, the Forgotten Chimpanaut. Now, the story really starts with Ham. Some of you may remember Ham. He was the first chimpanzee to go up in space. And Ham went up and right back down in 20 minutes, but he did come back down safely. And that was his important contribution. So if you ask people, they usually remember, or often remember, Ham, the first astronaut chimpanaut in space. Well, Enos was the second chimpanaut to go up. Now, Enos made 2 orbits of Earth. He also proved that the tasks he had learned on Earth, he could do during liftoff, during orbit, and until splashdown. He proved that he could function in space. Now, the person who knows him best, who knows Enos' story best, is probably my friend Jerry Finnig. Captain Finnig was chief veterinarian for Project Mercury. And he says that Enos was an ornery little chimpanaut, but he really liked working with him because he was really smart. Now, this was the time of the space race. In 1958, or race to space. In 1958, President Eisenhower, established the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. A few months later, Project Mercury was initiated, And with Project Mercury, the goal was to orbit a human and bring him back alive. So the rockets had already been tested and were continuing to be tested. There were rockets and they were sent up and they were tested on the ground, and exhaustive testing by the NASA engineers, and they felt pretty confident in their rockets. Now the astronauts had been fully trained. They were ready to go. As a matter of fact, ready to go doesn't quite cover it. They were eager to go. They wanted to go up. They had sent some animals up, several small animals, and sometimes they came back and many of them didn't. So the scientists who worked other places, not the scientists at NASA, they were ready to go, but the scientists who really didn't do the day-to-day work with NASA, and maybe academics, decided that, well, they just weren't sure. They had to be absolutely certain that a human could come back alive before they were willing to send him up. Well, what animal could we send? Well, it seems that primates are our closest animal relatives, and the chimpanzee is the most intelligent of the non-human primates. As a matter of fact, chimpanzees and humans share 98% the same DNA. What? Can you believe it? Well, I was surprised at that. I just couldn't believe it until I remembered then the work of Jane Goodall. And in Tanzania, she observed the chimps. She observed them in community as she saw them solving problems. She saw them using tools. She saw them expressing emotion. They might hug to show affection. Now, chimpanzees also suffer from the same diseases as humans: the common cold, hepatitis, polio. Don't know about COVID-19. It could be tragic for the chimps. Chimpanzees have coarse black hair all over their bodies, except for their expressive faces, their hands with opposable thumbs, and their feet with opposable big toes. Now, chimpanots and astronauts had extensive training in different physical environments that they might encounter in their space adventure. And they had extensive training in these different environments, like the altitude chamber and the centrifuge and the rocket sled. But chimpanzees then had chimpanaut school, where they were taught the psychomotor tasks that they would perform in space. Now, the very first task for the chimpanzee is to learn to sit calmly in his specially designed chair. I taught kindergarten, I get that. Now the light would blink and the chimp would push the button and he would get a drink of water. Push the button, light would blink, push the button, a drink of water. He was rewarded. You may remember this song from Sesame Street. One of these shapes is not like the other. Well, two triangles in a circle, push that lever under the circle and get a reward. Somewhere along the way in the training process, the chimps began to sit in their flight couch. And this was a specially designed place to sit as well as a container. And it had been designed by the engineers and the veterinarians and back and forth so that Enos had a safe place to sit and wouldn't be floating around in the capsule, so that he could perform the tasks he had learned. And when the lid was put on this flight couch, then it was pressurized and he was provided with oxygen. Now, one of the most amazing things that the chimps learned was to count to exactly 50. So Enos would grab that lever, whacky, 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 until he got to about 45, and then slowly and deliberately, carefully, he would push it to 50, and then hold his hand out for his delicious banana flavored pellets. Enos trained 1,263 hours. That would be about 31 work weeks. It's about 180 school days, which is an entire school year. You do remember school. I think I do. When Enos was launched into space, he weighed 42 pounds, which was well under the 50-pound limit for a chimpanaut. He was 38 inches tall, which was a medium-sized chimp. He was slightly over 5 years old, which in chimpanzee terms made him a teenager. Oh, that might explain his attitude. Enos had quite a personality. He was spunky and energetic, and he was unpredictable. And Jerry said he was not really a show-off, but he was a go-getter. Now, the way things took place, the sequence of events, you may notice the pattern. There's a chimp and then a human, and then a chimp and then a human. And as you know, or as you're now reminded, the first chimpanzee to go into space, first chimpanaut, was Ham. Ham launched above the Mercury Redstone 2. He went up into space and back down. He didn't go high enough or fast enough to go in orbit, but he did come back safely. And that was very significant. After that was on January 31st, 1961. On May 5th, 1961, astronaut Alan B. Shepard went up for a suborbital flight. His flight was also a success. He was on the Mercury Redstone 3, and his flight was also successful, making him the first astronaut, the first American astronaut to go into space. Well, a few months later was Enos' turn. Captain Finnick was there to oversee Enos' historic launch. On November 29th, 1961, at 10:08 in the morning, from launch pad number 14 at Cape Canaveral, Florida, Enos launched into space to orbit Earth 2 times and come back and be safely recovered after splashdown. Now, nothing goes just perfectly, and it might have been a problem for somebody else, but Enos was a go-getter. It seems to me that might be a pretty good characteristic to have if you're going into space. It seemed that all those tasks he had learned, he was able to do them all through his travel, but the system malfunctioned a little bit, and he got a mild shock to the bottom of his foot when the machine thought he gave an incorrect answer, but Enos knew he was giving correct answers. So even though he was receiving mild shocks, Enos continued to give correct answers all through his liftoff, his 2 orbits, and down to the Atlantic Ocean for splashdown. Now, once he splashed down inside the Mercury capsule, of course, he bobbed in the ocean like a bathtub toy. And it was a little bit before the Marine helicopter could come to pick them up. So Enos entertained himself by removing all the medical sensors all over his body that were on his body and some that were in his body. Yikes. Told you he was ornery. Then the helicopter came, it picked up the Mercury capsule and lowered it down to the USS Storms, which then went back to Kendley Air Force Base in Bermuda. Captain Finnig examined Enos thoroughly. Everything seemed fine. They went back to the Cape the next day and he examined him some more. And about a week later, after more monitoring, they went back to Holloman Aero Medical Center and he would continue to be more thoroughly examined and continued to be observed and monitored. And Enos had suffered no ill effects from his adventure in space. As a matter of fact, Enos provided a full dress rehearsal for Lieutenant Colonel John Glenn to go up into space and orbit, becoming the first American astronaut to orbit in the Mercury Atlas 6. Now, you may know, now you know about Enos. Enos, no longer the Forgotten Chimpanaut, because now you know he didn't get his picture on the front page of a magazine. He didn't have a ticker tape parade in his honor, but Enos played a very significant role in the history of space flight. In fact, now you know about Enos, the first chimpanzee to achieve Earth orbit.
Wow. Thank you, Nancy. That was fantastic. Great. I love it. Happy hands. I think Enos could become a mascot for our students right now during this time of COVID. You know, facing challenges, that is one smart chimp. I love that.
That's right. Keep on going. Keep on going. Yeah.
And
good idea.
While we travel through space, our next tellers up are Jean and Peggy Helmick Richardson. They are from the Dallas area. They are new members to SASA, and we welcome you. They have served on the Tejas Storytelling Association board, and they have also been featured tellers at the Tejas Storytelling Festival. And as we just traveled through the orbit around the Earth with Enos, we're now going to travel to Scotland, where they have a Scottish tale for us. So let's give happy hands to Jean and Peggy.
Hey, everybody.
Hello there.
We're going to do something kind of dumb tonight. Jean and I hadn't worked on a new tale in a long time. And just the other day, I opened up one of my favorite books of Scottish folk tales, just randomly opened it and read something and went, I love this. So I showed it to Jean. He fell in love with it. So for the last 2 days, we have been working on this story. So basically, you're getting our beta version. We have not told this to anyone, or for that matter, we really haven't managed to get through it without screwing up at least something. So cheat sheet at hand. And we're going to share you the story of Canopy Dick.
And so now the world premiere of Jean and Peggy Helmick Richardson, twice upon a time storytellers, telling a Scottish folk tale called Canopy Dick. Now, Canopy is a little tiny village way back in the moors, right on that wild borderland between Scotland and England. And Canopy was also the home of a famous or somewhat notorious horse trader by the name of Canopy Dick. And this is his story.
Now, Canopy Dick was a a man famous for his sense of humor and quick wit, as well as his bad temper. And because of this, his neighbors either considered him a good friend or a dreaded nuisance.
Now, it seems that one night in the dark of the night, a moonlit night, Canopy Dick was returning from an unsuccessful sale. He was a bit peeved because the man was not able to come up with his asking price for the two fine steeds that he was towing behind him. And he was looking to recoup his losses.
When out in the middle of nowhere, he looked ahead, and there in the distance, he saw a peculiar looking old man wearing really old fashioned clothes. And when he got closer to the man waved to him and held out to him. "Good sir, I see you've got with you two fine horses. Perchance you'd be interested in selling them to me?"
And Canopy Dick's ears perked up. This was his chance to recoup his losses. And this peculiar old man certainly didn't look like a seasoned horse trader. Canopy Dick was said he would even cheat the devil in spite of his cloven hooves if he was making a deal with him. So Canopy Dick kind of thought for a moment and said, "Why, yes. My asking price for these horses is," and he named a fantastically high price that he was sure he would be bargained down from.
But to his surprise, the old man readily agreed to pay the asking price. And he was even more amazed when the old man paid him in gold unicorns. Now, gold unicorns are called that because on one side of the coin is stamped a unicorn with a crown on its head, and they had not been used in Scotland for hundreds of years at that time. And even though they were no longer valid currency, Canopy Dick figured he could probably make even more money selling them to a coin collector, and if not that, he would just melt them down for their gold.
And so it was that Canopy Dick rode his own horse straight home with the jingle in his pocket that made him smile. But when he got back home and shared his tale with others at the tavern, he was looking for more horses, and a messenger came. A message came that the old man wanted two more horses. Ah, yes. And the instructions were that he was to meet the old man at the same time, at the same place, and he was to come alone.
Now, it was about a week after that business dealing when another message arrived from the old man, once again wanting to buy two horses and asking him to come at the same time, at the same place, and alone. And each and every time, Canopy Dick was paid in those curious unicorn coins.
Now, after making the deal and getting paid for the last one, he became a bit curious about that old man and where he got the coins and where he even lived. And so Canopy Dick thought for a moment and said, horse trading is a rather thirsty task, and we have no tavern nearby. Might it be that you, sire, could share a pint of ale with this old horse trader?
And the old man readily agreed, and he invited Canopy Dick back to his home. But he warned him, "Sir, I do feel like I need to tell you, should you lose courage, you will live to regret it."
And Canopy Dick just laughed. A big man like him, he was bold and brave. Now, lead on, old man. I shall not lose my nerve. And so they went down a winding path through the dark hills.
And it was just as they rounded toward the third hill when it finally dawned on Canopy Dick where they were. and he was shocked that he hadn't recognized it before. Why, he was standing right in the middle of the Luck and Hare, that land that is said to be the final resting place of King Arthur and his knights, and also the place where King Arthur and his knights will once again rise when needed.
Now, as they came to that last hill, there was a large cavern, and Canopy Dick was rather surprised that he hadn't seen that cavern before in daylight, and he was even more surprised when he noticed a great wooden door that the old man was pulling open, leading into a dark cavern.
Now, before he went in, the old man turned and looked at Canopy Dick and said, "Sir, might I suggest you turn around now, walk back to your horse, and ride home with that gold in your pockets? I assure you, I will think none the less of you."
But Canopy Dick just laughed and said, lead on, old man, I'm thirsty. And so they walked into that cold, dark cavern.
Now, after his eyes adjusted to the low light, Canopy Dick was surprised to realize that he was standing at the end of a long hall, and on either side was a number of stables.
And in each stable was a coal black battle horse in full armor.
And standing next to each horse was a knight in coal black armor.
And each knight clasped a sword.
And neither man nor beast twitched,
Nor did they blink.
or even whisper a sigh.
Canopy Dick thought this was a little bit odd and quickened his step to catch up to the old man who was near the end of that row of stables. And the old man entered a large room.
And it was a room awash with light because countless torches were mounted in the walls.
And he led Canopy Dick to a table, an antique table at the end of that hall, and on that table there lay a magnificent sword and a jewel-encrusted battle horn.
And the old man looked at Canopy Dick and said, "Sir, here before you lie the riddle. You must not lose courage, because it is said that whoever picks up the horn and sword shall rule all of Britain. But the question comes, can you do so without losing courage? And do you know which one to pick up first?"
Now, Canopy Dick was good with riddles, and he looked at that man in the bright light, and it suddenly dawned on him, I know this man. This man has to be the famous bard, True Thomas, Thomas the Rhymer. You all know the story of Thomas the Rhymer, but that's a long story for another night. But Canopy Dick was sure that this was Thomas the Rhymer.
So he carefully examined the items on the table and then decided to reach his hand out and grab the sword, and then he stopped. No, wait. What if grabbing the sword first means that the knights in the stables would interpret that as a sign of defiance, or maybe even hostility against his host? So he pulled his hand back.
And then he eyed that jewel-encrusted horn. He said, that's it. The horn is the first one we should sound. So he grabbed up that horn, put it to his lips, and let loose a mighty blast from that battle horn, and it echoed through the chamber like rolling thunder out down the hall of stables.
And with that, he heard the stomping of horses' hooves and the rattle of armor as each knight began to mount his steed.
And Canopy Dick's courage failed him. He lunged for that sword to grasp it so he would be armed, but alas, it was too late.
A voice boomed out, "Woe to the coward heir who was born, who in defiance turned down the sword and blew the horn."
Canopy Dick dropped the horn, and suddenly a great whirlwind came through that little hall and swept round and round, faster and faster, until at last it picked up Canopy Dick and carried him right out the chamber, down that row of stables, out of the cavern, bouncing along the 3 dark hills, until at last he landed with a thud right next to his startled horse.
It was the next morning when a shepherd found the battered and bloody Canopy Dick laying there on the road, and he ran to him and asked him how he had come to be like this. And it was to the shepherd that Canopy Dick told his story. And with his last breath, Canopy Dick reached up and grabbed the shepherd by the shirt and pulled him close to his face. And looking him square in the eyes, warned him, "Sir, whatever you do, never allow yourself to be carried away by fear."
The story of Canopy Dick. Thank you.
Mark, we can't hear you.
Thank you. Unmute. There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Peggy and Jean, thank you for that wonderful story about Canopy Dick. We can't lose courage right now. And as tellers, we can't lose courage. We lose our courage, we can no longer tell our stories. As Enos went out into space, which was very courageous, we have to sometimes take things and look it straight in the eye. And our next teller coming up is John Munley. He's a member of SASA, and he's told on our SASA stages. He's also told in Helotes and in other areas. And we have to keep our eye on John right now because he has his eye on it, and we're going to welcome, and let's give happy hands for John Munley.
Hi, I'm glad to see that you're all looking well, and I hope that you aren't as stir crazy as I am after being home for 4 months. My story tonight is ostensibly about a fish. But more importantly, it's the story of how a young boy, with a lot of help from a wonderful older man, becomes more of a truly human being. I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania in a medium-sized city called Scranton, which you're probably familiar with because Joe Biden grew up there also, and actually lived about a mile down the street from where I lived. When I was born, my grandmother had already died, but my grandfather came to live with us because my mother was a teacher and she really needed the help, and my father had to go to work also. So he really became my, I guess you'd call it today, a nanny, and took care of me, walked me on my first day to kindergarten, which was just a short distance away, and taught me many, many things over the course of the time that he lived with us. He was a tough guy in that he never complained about anything. He had started working when he was 6 years old in the coal mines, of all places. And he was what was called a breaker boy. Now, those of you that don't know about coal comes out of the mine in great big pieces. And it goes up on a conveyor belt to what's called a breaker. where it's smashed into smaller pieces. But mixed in with the coal are just rocks that are called slag. And picture, if you will, on the other side of this coal breaker are a whole series of chutes. And about every 10 feet down the chute is a little boy with his legs spread to each side of the chute, and he watches the coal as it comes roaring down. Now, there's 100 of them there, and their job is to quickly look down at what is coming down the chute, pick out the slag from the coal, and throw it away. And this they do for kindly 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. So, as I said, he was a guy who was very independent from a very early age. Well, by the time he lived with us and I got old enough to realize, maybe 10 or 11 years old, what was going on in the world, I became his helper. And he grew 3 trees in our yard, a pear tree, an apple tree, and a cherry tree, along with he planted a 1/4 acre garden every year. Now, he was in his 80s, and he did this with a pitchfork and a shovel. And my family was fortunate enough then, all winter long, we had fresh apple pies, because we canned them. We had fresh pears, fresh cherries, strawberries grew in the back of the yard on vines. And also something I just remember, and each time I stand in the summertime in the hot sun, it comes back to me. What it was like to have a salt shaker in your pocket, because he always had one, and to pick a fresh radish out of the ground or a fresh carrot, wipe the dirt off of it, put salt on it, and stand there and eat it right where you grew it. And to this day, it still warms my heart when I remember this. Well, my grandfather, as I said, had quick eyes and quick hands, from his work all his life. And over the years, he had saved enough to buy a cottage on Music Lake, which is in the Pocono Mountains. Now, Music Lake was a beautiful place. It was a lake that was very, very cold. It was fed by springs, and you could see down 30 feet into the water. It was that clean. And I would spend the summers there with him, and my family would come up on weekends. Well, we did everything. I mean, he taught me how to fix shingles. He taught me how to garden. He taught me how to fish. Because this was really his favorite activity during the summer. And we would fish every day. And at night, he would sit in the corner of the kitchen in what was a cloud of smoke, because he smoked a pipe in this awful tobacco called Scott's Best. And I would sit under the cloud at his knees, and he would tell me stories. And he told fascinating stories. He'd tell me about how, when he became a miner, in the morning, they would take a canary with them when they went down into the mines. And I said, Grandpa, what would you do with the canary down there? He said, well, Johnny, if the canary lived, it was safe for the men to work down there. If the canary died, it wasn't safe, and we had to go back up again and clear the gas out of the mine. Well, as I said, he loved to fish. And so one day we were out in his Sears 12-foot semi-V aluminum boat fishing on Music Lake. And we were out there, and we had packed a little lunch to go along with us. And we hadn't had much luck so far that day. And it was getting towards the late afternoon, and we were just about ready to pack it up and try another day. When I had my line in the water and I felt this enormous tug, oh, I grabbed it because I didn't want the rod to go push out of the boat and fall into the water. And I started reeling madly. And I got this tremendous resistance. The line started peeling off the drag on my reel. And I would wind it again and it would peel out and wind it again. And finally, I could see about 6 feet below the surface, this flash of silver. And I kept winding, and up came the biggest trout that I'd ever caught. And it was beautiful. It had 3 or 4 different colors, and it shimmered in the sunlight. It almost looked like it was dressed in a coat of diamonds. And I picked the fish up, put it in the bottom of the boat, and looked down at it. And when I looked at the fish, I looked at it in the eye, and the most shocking thing happened. The fish looked back at me. Well, we rowed back into shore, and we had a bucket with us, and we put that fish in the bucket, and my grandfather took it up and he put it into the rain barrel that was full of rainwater that we kept by the side of the house. Went in, had dinner, went to bed that night. And the next day, I got up early and I noticed that my grandfather was already up. And he was out standing next to that rain barrel, and he was taking a bucket of water out of the rain barrel. Well, I didn't know what he was doing, and I didn't ask him. I figured he was just getting water to water plants or perhaps some water for the house. And we sat down for breakfast and did our chores. And then we went out fishing again and swimming and doing all the things that one does at a lake in the beautiful summertime. Well, again, the following morning, I woke up early and there he was out there again by the side of the house, and he was taking another bucket of water out of the rain barrel. And this went on for several days. And finally, I went out and I looked in the rain barrel, and there was the fish with only a tiny little bit, maybe 1/4 of an inch of water in there. And normally a fish that's in that little bit of water would die. But this fish wasn't. As a matter of fact, he was standing on his tail, leaning against the side of the barrel. Well, I ran in the house, Grandpa, come out. I want you to see what I have out here. Well, out he came. And I said, Grandpa, look at the fish. There's no water in there. The fish is alive, and it's standing up on its tail. Well, he picked the fish up out of the bucket, out of the barrel, and the fish followed us down to the boat. But the fish, we thought it would jump in the water again and escape, but it didn't. It got into the boat with us. And all summer long, for the rest of the summer, that fish kept us company wherever we were at the cottage. It would slide around on the grass in the morning when the dew was there. It would wiggle its tail and get down to the boat and go out with us on the boat. And it was just wonderful. Well, it was getting towards late August, and we all know what that is. When there used to be something called school, the children would go back to before the COVID-19 came. And it was one of those late days in August where summer is waning. It's time to go back to school. It's a bittersweet time because you do want to see your friends at school, but summer is so wonderfully beautiful. And again, I wake up early in the morning, but this time My grandfather is out by the side of the house, and he's putting a bucket of water back in the rain barrel with the fish. And the next morning, he does the same thing. And finally, after a few days, the rain barrel is filled with water again, and the fish is swimming around in there. And that morning, when we went down to the boat for our last fishing trip of the summer, we took the fish with us in a bucket. And we were out there on the lake for several hours. And it was coming towards the end of the day when we noticed that the fish had come out of the bucket and was looking at us in the eye. Well, this fish had become a friend over the summer. We couldn't let him just die. So we picked him up, we put him back in the lake, we waved goodbye to him, and I never forgot him. Over the years, I've thought of that fish many, many times. And I wondered how often he thought of me. As all things that are living are good and beautiful, that fish taught me to respect nature, to treat it kindly, and to celebrate its wonder.
Wow, John, thank you for that. Happy hands. John, I really did love that story. The way you started that story, it made me think of my summers at home. My mom canned strawberry figs and grape jelly, a very humorous tale. I've had a pet dog, I've had a pet cat, but a pet fish, you got us all hooked, and that story got us hooked as well. Thank you for that. Our next teller is a good friend of mine. I've known her too long, Donna Ingham. She is a homegrown, planted, root deep in Texas girl. She has taught school, a professor for many years, and we had an opportunity to work together once as artists in residence for Gemini Inc. Donna has such a homegrown feeling to her stories. She tells wonderful short tales, I would say, but some would say maybe long tales. And I don't really like using that term, tall tales, to describe Donna. You know, you think of tall tales, you think that it's not true. And although she has won the liars contest, several liars contests, I just want to state for a fact, everything she tells you is true. And so I know she's only going to speak the truth today. She has a story that's called An Imaginary Friend Named Abilene. So let's give it up for Donna.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to be here, back amongst the San Antonio folk. Did I get myself unmuted all right?
Yep.
All right. Well, this is a true story that just sounds tall. When I was about 4 years old, I had an imaginary playmate named Abilene. Well, for one thing, I grew up an only child. Well, actually, my sister did too, but that's another story. And I lived with my folks at the edge of town in Brownfield, Texas, up there on the South Plains. And we lived at the edge of town because my daddy was still just a big old country boy at heart, and he wanted to have livestock. So we had chickens, we had 2 trained mules, and we had horses, including my pony, Lucy. Now, Lucy was just a half Shetland. She had one of those wild Shetland manes, And she had what we called a cold mouth, which meant that even under the best of circumstances, she was difficult for me to rein. And under the worst of circumstances, which was anytime there was a car around, she would be shying away from that car, and it was all I could do to get her to go where I wanted her to go. And if one of the people in one of those cars happened to honk, well, Lucy would take that bit in her mouth and bolt for home, and it was all I could do, just hang on, ride it out. And so for that reason, probably, my folks cautioned me to stay away from busy streets. And under no circumstances was I to cross the highway that was several blocks north of our house. Now, we lived just across the street west from a tree nursery. You probably realize that we don't have very many trees growing up there in that part of Texas. And so some enterprising somebody had gotten the idea of selling these trees to people to plant in their yards. And what they were mostly was cedar trees, the kind that people in this part of the country are trying to get rid of. But people in my hometown were buying them, planting them in their yards. And right next to the tree nursery was the town reservoir. It was just an open man-made pond with high earthen man-made sides on it. And those two things, that reservoir to catch the rainwater, of course, and the tree nursery, well, it held all the wonder and mystery for me of an Amazonian jungle. But of course, I was told to stay out of there too. Now, my only other day-to-day companion, so to speak, other than Lucy, was my mixed breed dog, Skippy. And Skippy was just as frightened of storms as Lucy was of cars. So anytime one of those big old West Texas thunderstorms came rolling in, it was thundering, it was lightning, old Skippy would run to the front door and start whining and clawing and scratching until my mother would take pity on him, let him in. He would go into the dining room, get under the buffet, and just kind of quiver and quake until the storm was over. So there we were, the three of us, Lucy and Skippy and I, hampered as we were by our restrictions and our fears, and we lacked leadership until Abilene came along, or rather until she just sprang whole from my imagination, just like Pallas Athena sprang from the head of Zeus. Although Abilene was a bit more into mischief than she was into wisdom. An adventuresome, inquisitive sort, Abilene was, always wondering what would happen if, or what something would look like if. And she made me her agent. For example, we lived right next door to the Knowles, Troy and Bess Noel. And Troy was a wonderful, wonderful gardener. Gladiolas were his specialty. And he didn't have any cedar trees planted in his yard. No, as a matter of fact, in his backyard, which was sort of catty-cornered from our side porch, he had one of those magnificent, sweeping, weeping willow trees with those tendrils that just go all the way to the ground. And Abilene got to wondering one day what those trailing tendrils would look like without any leaves on them. And so she had me go over there and reach up just as high as I could and carefully, very carefully, strip the leaves off. Only I didn't make it all the way around the tree because Bessie, Troy's wife, came tearing around the back corner of their house, hollering, "Dasu, what in the world are you doing?" And, you know, she didn't have the least bit of sympathy for me when I said, Abilene told me to do it, nor for Abilene's need to know what denuded weeping willow trees look like. Well, for a while after that, Abilene and I had to confine our activities to the inside of my house. But she soon grew restless with that and wanted to go back outside, even though by now it was winter. So one day I went in, I got all dressed up in my pink snowsuit. I found my mother, and I said to her, we want to go outside and play. And my mother said, well, I think it'd be okay. Just don't get too cold and kind of keep an eye out. There's supposed to be a cloud moving in, a storm moving in. I said, yes, ma'am. Now, we didn't go out the side door because the Knowles were still keeping a pretty close watch on their yard. So we went out through the front door, and Skippy was out there in the front yard, and well, all three of us played for a while. And then all three of us just drifted over to that edge of the yard that looked over into that tree nursery. And I knew Abilene wanted to go over there. But I said, Abilene, I can't. My mother and my daddy, well, they both told me I couldn't go over there. And she said, and they're exactly right too, if you're by yourself. But if I go with you and Skippy goes with you, I think it'd be all right. Well, that sounded reasonable. So off we went. Well, it wasn't long till we were lost in all those cedar trees. And meanwhile, my folks had looked out into the front yard. Well, they didn't see me. They didn't see Skippy. And they never had seen Abilene. So they hit that little parental panic button, and they started scouring the neighborhood, and they were whistling for Skippy and hollering for me. And, you know, we didn't hear them. It must have been all those trees. We just didn't hear them. But by now, I was definitely tired of looking at cedar trees. And it was getting colder, and there was a cloud moving in. But Abilene either could not or would not show me the way to go home. Well, my daddy had called out the posse. He called a couple of friends of his. They came over, they saddled up the two mules and my dad's riding horse, and they were, at that very moment, riding in to that tree nursery. For the growing fear was that I had somehow made it over to and up on the sides of that reservoir there, and had fallen in. I'm actually getting a message here that my phone is overheating.
Well, while we're waiting on Donna, can you guys hear me? Am I there? I'd like to welcome everybody for being here and give a shout out to some people who are here. I see you on I'd like to welcome Kay. Thank you for being a part. Elizabeth Ellis from the Dallas area. Glennis Holmes-Strauss is here. I'm just looking through the names here. Judy Alton, welcome. Janet Bickley Burton from Dallas. Oh, and our YouTube, is that John Munley's wife? Yeah, she's here. And Karen, I want to thank you for managing and operating our YouTube channel. And Dick Davis, not sure where you're from, but you know, you got a great kind of twin vibe I'm feeling here from John Munley, you and the beard. That actually, you know, both of you can maybe do that Santa Claus thing. And Gene, you got that beard thing going on too. So I don't know if this is a bearded night for us all here. Let's see, I'm trying to pass some time here. Oh, let me just tell you something. So Sue, I'll let you speak in a minute, you know, while we're waiting. September 5th, Sue, if I'm right, you can nod your head. September 5th, SASA, we're going to be having an unbelievable workshop that's coming up with an international storyteller, Richard Martin. If you want to learn more about it, you can check out that information in the chat room. I think Sue has already posted information about that workshop there. You can find more about it on our website and our Facebook page. I know I'm going to be there. I think it's about folk tales. Yes, it's about folk tales. And I want to thank Jean and can't think of your wife's name, Peggy. Jean and Peggy right now for giving that wonderful story about folk tales. I'm actually working on one Creole folk tales that I found I hope to see everybody here next month. We're doing this once a month. John Hale, happy hands to you for always setting this up for us. And I thought this was going to be complicated for me tonight. I can't think if there's anything else we need to say. Just want to thank everybody, really thank everybody for being here. It means a great deal to me reaching out during this time. Sue, you'd like to say something?
Yes, Elizabeth is with us also, and she has a wonderful workshop coming up also. And I didn't know if Elizabeth wanted to plug that in. Can we unmute
Yeah.
Elizabeth? I know she has something cool coming up too.
Hey there, thanks. I appreciate it. I want to make sure I'm getting the day right. On September the 19th, it will be 6 weeks away from Halloween. And I'm going to do a 3-hour workshop called Prepare to Scare. It'll be from 9 to 1. And it's a benefit for the Tejas Storytelling Association. So we'll be sending out information about it. I'll send some to you, and I would.
I've always wondered if you're on stage and somebody gets the hook and just jerks you off the stage. I never had it happen to me electronically, however. So are we out of time?
No.
Oh, okay. I figured you might have to shut this thing down at 8. So I left you in the middle of that that tree nursery, I being lost and Abilene not being able or not being willing to show me how to get home. And my dad having called 2 of his friends, and they'd saddled up the mules and saddled up the riding horse. They were coming in because they were afraid I'd fallen in the reservoir. That's where I left you, I think. And about that time, that storm kept moving in, kept moving in, kept moving in. And it started thundering and it started lightning. And of course, that's when Skippy just took off, thinking only he had to get back to his refuge under the buffet in the dining room. Well, I thought, of course, Skippy knows the way home. All I have to do is follow him. So I took off running as fast as I could, but he was a good bit faster. And I lost sight of him. But it didn't matter, because by this time, my daddy and his 2 conscripted possemen had ridden in, and they could look on down. And first of all, they saw Skippy. And then they could look on down. They could see me in my pink snowsuit. And I was saved. And I guess my folks were just so happy that I was alive and well that they spent a good bit more time hugging me and holding me than they did scolding me. Still, when I told my mother, Abilene told me to do it, my mother said rather sternly, I thought, that was a very bad thing for Abilene to do. So you'd think that'd be the end of it, my listening to Abilene. But we did have one more notable adventure. We were riding double one day on old Lucy, and Abilene said, don't you think it would be fun to go over to the elementary school and show off just a little bit? And I said, well, it probably would, but you have to remember that elementary school is on the other side of that highway I'm not supposed to cross. And she said, oh, well, what if we just ride on this side of the highway and show off just a little bit? And so we did that. Well, we got there just as school was out, and all those children were coming piling out on the front lawn, waiting for the school buses, waiting for their parents to pick them up. But when they saw us on that horse on the other side of the highway, they started hollering and waving and saying, come on over, come on over. It's just like a game of Red Rover. Well, Abilene looked both ways down the highway. She didn't see any cars coming. She said, look, there's not a car in sight. I think it'd be okay to go on over. And you know, that sounded reasonable. And so we did. Well, I never felt so important in all my life. All those older children wanted to pet my horse. I said, don't get too close behind her. She kicks. Finally, one little boy said, can I get up on her just for a minute? So I slid my leg over the saddle horn, slid to the ground. I'm leading Lucy over to a stump here because remember, she's just a half Shetland. So this boy needed something to step up on so he could get his foot in the stirrup and swing up in the saddle. But about that time, well, the school buses started to arrive. And so Lucy is shying away from the school buses and shying away from the stump at the same time. And then some mother, impatient to get her child's attention, honked. And that did it. Lucy took that butt in her mouth. She bolted for home. She jerked the reins right out of my hands and I was stranded again. Well, when Lucy showed up in our front yard with that empty saddle, my folks hit the parental panic button again. But this time they didn't have long to worry because somebody at the school knew me, knew them, called them. They came to get me in the car. When I slid into the front seat beside my mother, I said to her, Abilene told me to do it. And my mother said, even more sternly than before, Abilene has become a very, very bad influence on you. And so I killed her. Abilene, that is. Now, mind you, I don't remember this. I must have repressed it. But my mother said that I walked into our kitchen one day through that side door, the one that looked out on the Knowles backyard, where just now the weeping willow was getting its leaves back. Stood there right flat-footed in the middle of the kitchen, and I said, I killed Abilene. And my mother rejoiced, not the least bit worried apparently about whatever psychopathic tendencies that might suggest about her only child. She simply knew how very, very glad she was to be rid of the orneriest child she'd never known, Abilene.
I want to thank you for that story about Abilene. What I'm thinking, although you did kill her, it's a possibility she was resurrected not long ago and disconnected you from us. So I think maybe there's still a little bit of Abilene spirit out there. I think there was an Abilene in Beaumont where I grew up. I want to thank everybody for being a part of our storytelling tonight. Special thanks to our tellers, Peggy and Jean, Helmick Richardson, Donna Ingham, John Munley, Nancy Simpson. We want to thank you guys for giving this time, sharing your stories. We want to thank all of our listeners because without a listener, what's the point of the story? I know it's a lot of you that I didn't mention. I saw that Marianne is there. I want to thank you, Marianne, for being there. Shane, I saw another Elizabeth. I can't think of the last name right now.
Beeman. Elizabeth Beeman.
Elizabeth Beeman. Anyone else that I forgot? Just want to say again, our workshop is going to be on September 5th with Richard Martin, international storyteller on folk tales. Elizabeth is giving her workshop September 19th. It's a 3-hour workshop on, I think, scary stories. Another shout out and thank you to John and Karen Archer for this. Just thank everybody for being here. And thank you, Sue, for asking me to do this. Anybody else want to do it next time? Great. Anything else? I'm good.
Hey, if there's anyone who wants to tell next month, send me an email, suekuntz@gmail.com. We try to get 4 tellers up there, and Bernadette's going to be one of our tellers. I'd love to hear from y'all. Y'all are so gracious to come on. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So please email me if you're interested. Okay.
So